She thought she had found the love of her life, a man who made her laugh, dream, and believe that for the first time, her heart was safe. On her wedding day, with her dress impeccable and her eyes full of emotion, Heloisa was ready to say yes to the future she had always wanted. But then, he looked into her eyes and said something that destroyed everything. "I lied to you." In an instant, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. What was supposed to be the happiest day of her life became the worst of all. With her heart in pieces, she ran away from the altar, not knowing if she would ever be able to forgive him. Now she has to decide. Was the love she felt real or just a well-constructed illusion? An intense story about love, lies, and redemption begins now. And the question that won't go away is, can you forgive him? "You're already 30, Heloisa." Her mother's voice echoed through the kitchen, full of impatience. "Do you know what that means?" Heloisa kept her gaze fixed on the cup of tea in front of her, turning the spoon around and around. She knew that tone. It was the start of yet another discussion about her future in love. "It means I'm independent. I have a stable job and I'm fine on my own," she replied, trying to remain calm. "It means you're past the age of choice," her mother retorted, crossing her arms. "Do you want to end up like your Aunt Vera, alone, surrounded by cats?" Heloisa sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "Mom, we talked about this. I don't need a husband to be happy." "And who said anything about happiness?" Her mother snorted. "I'm talking about security, a future. My future is already settled, thank you." "You need to at least meet Daniel," she insisted. "He's a wonderful man, polite, generous, and a millionaire," added Heloisa, raising an eyebrow. What's wrong with that?" Heloisa dropped her spoon into the cup, splashing some tea on the table. She quickly wiped it up with a napkin before facing her mother. "The problem is that you want me to know you for the wrong reason. You refuse to see the opportunities, Heloisa. He has no one. He wants a wife, someone to love him and take care of him. So he wants a nanny." "Don't twist my words." The mother became exasperated, slamming her hand on the table. "I'm just asking you to go to the event where he'll be, that's all." Heloisa sighed and leaned back in her chair. She knew that continuing to argue wouldn't help. Her mother wouldn't give up until she got what she wanted. "All right, I'll go," she said at last. Her mother gave her a victorious smile. "I knew you'd make the right choice." But just to be clear, Heloisa pointed a finger at her mother. "That doesn't mean I'm going to marry him." "Let's see," said her mother enigmatically as she picked up the cups from the table. Heloisa picked up her cell phone and opened the messaging app. Her best friend Camilla had already sent dozens of messages asking how the conversation had gone. "Camilla, what's up? Has your mother given up on the absurd idea?" Heloisa, "Not at all. Now I'm stuck at an event to meet Daniel." Camilla, "This looks like a tragedy. At least she's wearing a nice dress." Heloisa let out a humorless laugh. She knew the event would be a trap, but she couldn't see any other way out. As she went up to her room, she thought about what awaited her. A forced meeting, a superficial conversation, and in the end, her mother saying, "I told you so." But fate had other plans. The hall was packed. Heloisa held a glass of juice while her eyes roamed over the elegant decor. Her mother had dragged her to this charity event as the perfect excuse for her to meet Daniel. Stop frowning," murmured Camilla next to her. "You'll end up with wrinkles before you're 40. "This is a trap," Heloisa grumbled, taking a sip of juice. "My mother thinks that throwing me into the arms of a millionaire is the solution to my life. And maybe it is," Camilla smiled. "Maybe he's a man's dream. I doubt it." Before Camilla could answer, someone rushed past Heloisa and bumped into her. Her glass tilted, the liquid threatening to spill, but before the worst could happen, a nimble arm caught it. "Sorry," said a male voice, firm but calm. Heloisa looked up. The man in front of her had an easy smile and an attentive gaze. The detail that most caught her eye, however, was the wheelchair he was in. "I should apologize, I was distracted," she said, straightening her glass. "I guess we're even then," he joked, handing her a napkin. Eloisa smiled, surprised at how naturally he handled the situation. "Do you work here?" she asked, noticing that he was holding a few sheets of paper. "In a way," he replied mysteriously. "And you?" "I came against my will," she said without thinking, and then regretted it. To her surprise, he laughed. "Then there are two of us." She was about to ask him something else, but Camilla hissed at her. "Eloisa, we need to go to reception," she invented. "Of course," she said, casting one last glance at the stranger before walking away. As soon as they were far enough away, Camilla turned to her, her eyes wide. "Do you know who he is? A polite guy who saved my clothes from disaster?" "It's Daniel." Eloisa stopped in the middle of the road. Daniel, the millionaire, the guy your mother wants you to meet." Her heart gave a strange leap. It couldn't be. Camilla crossed her arms. "But why do you think everyone is watching him?" Eloisa turned slowly and met Daniel's gaze from across the room. He smiled, and her stomach churned. She didn't know exactly what to feel, but one thing was certain. The evening had just become much more interesting. Eloisa tried to ignore Daniel's gaze on her, but it was impossible. During the event, he always seemed to be around, talking to someone, laughing at something, and occasionally giving her an amused look. "You're staring," whispered Camilla next to her. "I'm not," Eloisa lied, looking away quickly. "He's on his way here." Eloisa's heart leapt when Daniel approached with a quiet smile. "We seem to keep bumping into each other," he said. "I guess so," she replied, trying to keep her composure. "Would you like a walk?" he asked, indicating the exit to the lighted garden. Eloisa hesitated. Her mother would love to see her interacting with Daniel, but she herself didn't know if she wanted to get close to him. However, curiosity overcame her. "All right." They walked in silence for a moment until Daniel broke the tension. "You really didn't want to come today, did you?" Eloisa let out a laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "Just a little," he joked. "My mother thinks I should accept any marriage proposal that comes along." "Do you? What do you think?" She reflected before answering. "I don't think marriage is a question of opportunity. It's a question of love." Daniel was silent for a moment. "Have you ever loved anyone?" Eloisa hesitated. "I thought I had, but maybe it was just a fleeting dream." "I see." Eloisa looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "And what about you? I've never been sure if I was really loved, or just because of what I represent." The answer took Eloisa by surprise. She had never thought about it before, but it made sense. "That sounds lonely," she said softly. "Sometimes it is," he admitted, shrugging. A comfortable silence settled between them until Daniel smiled again. "If I told you I liked you straight away, would you laugh at me?" Eloisa arched an eyebrow. "That depends. Is that a kind of line?" He laughed. "If it is, I'm clearly not very good at it." She shook her head, amused. "Glad to know you're human after all. And what did you think I was?" "My mother described you as an unattainable demigod." Daniel laughed. "I like her." "Of course you do. She wants me to marry you." He smiled, but there was something else in his gaze. "And what do you want?" The question hung in the air, but before Eloisa could answer, Camilla appeared. "Your mother is looking for you," she said. Eloisa looked at Daniel and saw a glint of expectation in his eyes. "I'm still figuring it out," she finally replied. As she walked back to the salon, she felt that something had changed in her. Over the next few days, Eloisa tried to ignore the persistent feeling that something inside her had changed. She and Daniel began to talk more often, and each conversation made her want to get to know him more. He was different from what she had imagined. "Is this getting serious?" Camilla asked as they both organized papers in the office where they worked. "Of course not," Eloisa answered too quickly. "You smile every time he sends you a message. That's ridiculous. And now you're turning red." Eloisa snorted. "He's interesting, that's all." Camilla laughed. "That's how it starts." In the late afternoon, as she was getting ready to leave, Eloisa's phone vibrated. "Daniel, Dinner with me tonight? She hesitated before answering. Heloisa, are you always so direct? Daniel, would you rather I rolled over? Heloisa, perhaps a little mystery would be interesting. Daniel, then find out the mystery yourself. She laughed and typed in the answer before she could think too much. Heloisa, all right, where do we meet? Hours later, I was sitting opposite him in a cozy restaurant. How did you know I would accept? She asked. I didn't know, but I like to take risks. Heloisa smiled, feeling more at ease than she had expected. Have you always been like this? Sure of yourself? Not always. Daniel took a sip of wine. But I learned that if I didn't believe in myself, no one else would either. I think that explains a lot about you. What about you? What does it explain, Heloisa? She played with her napkin, hesitating. I think I've spent so much time trying to meet other people's expectations that sometimes I forget what I really want. Daniel watched her for a moment. So what do you want now? Heloisa looked at him. For the first time, she didn't want to run away from the answer. I want to experience something real. Daniel's gaze softened. So do I. From that night on, their meetings became frequent. They talked about everything, work, dreams, fears. Heloisa realized that she felt free around him. There were no judgments, only understanding. Until one day, while they were walking through a park, Daniel suddenly stopped. I've been waiting for the right moment for this. Heloisa arched an eyebrow. That sounds serious. He took a deep breath. Will you marry me? She widened her eyes. What? I know it's early, but I've never been so sure of anything. Her heart raced. Daniel, this... He took her hand. You don't have to answer now. I just want you to think about it. Heloisa felt something new, the real possibility of a future with him. And that, surprisingly, didn't scare her. The hall was full of guests. Flowers adorned every corner, and the soft melody of a piano filled the air. Heloisa should have been overjoyed, but instead she felt the weight of something inexplicable in her chest. In front of the mirror, she adjusted her veil and tried to take a deep breath. Nervous? Camilla asked, adjusting the train of her dress. A little, Heloisa admitted. It's all right. Weddings always give you a chill. I don't know. It feels different. Camilla held her hand. You love Daniel, don't you? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Then that's what matters. Heloisa smiled, trying to dispel her unease, but when she entered the ceremony and found Daniel waiting for her, she noticed something strange in his expression. He seemed hesitant. The celebrant began the ceremony, and Heloisa tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong, until Daniel took a deep breath and interrupted the ceremony. Before we continue, I need to say something. The hall fell silent. Heloisa's heart beat faster. What's going on? She whispered. Daniel looked at her guiltily. I lied to you. A buzz spread among the guests. What are you talking about? Heloisa's voice faltered. Daniel ran his tongue over his lips before saying firmly, I'm not a wheelchair user. The world around Heloisa stopped. What? I can walk. The shock was instantaneous. The air seemed to have disappeared. No, it doesn't make sense. Daniel lowered his head. I did it because I never knew if anyone could love me for who I am, not for my money. The hall turned into chaos. Murmurs, shocked expressions, disapproving looks. Heloisa felt suffocated. Have you been lying to me all this time? Her voice came out weak, almost inaudible. I was afraid. Afraid? She took a step back. You made me believe that your reality was different. Daniel's eyes were full of regret. My love for you has always been true. But Heloisa couldn't listen any longer. With tears in her eyes, she turned and ran out of the ceremony. Behind her, Daniel called her name, but it was too late. She had already left. Heloisa ran with no certain destination. The cold night air hit her face, but nothing made her feel less suffocated. Her mind was in chaos. How could Daniel lie like that? She sat down on a nearby bench, trying to catch her breath. Her impeccable dress was now crumpled, the veil falling to the side. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked her cell phone. Camilla, Where are you? Everyone's looking for you. Heloisa, I need to be alone. The messages kept coming, but she ignored them. Do you want to talk? Daniel's voice made her freeze. She looked up and saw him standing there, still wearing his suit, his eyes pleading. Did you follow me? His voice came out harsh. I had to find you. She stood up on an impulse. Did you? You tricked me, Daniel. You made me believe something that was never real. What we felt was real. Don't give me that, Heloisa shouted. You built our relationship on a lie. He ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. I know I made a mistake, but do you understand why I did it? She laughed humorlessly. There's no justification for manipulating someone like that. I didn't want to be loved for my money. Do you have any idea how many people have approached me out of interest? So your solution was to pretend to be someone else. Daniel approached, but Heloisa backed away. You would never have looked at me if you knew the truth. You don't know that, she retorted. Daniel remained silent. I loved you, Daniel. Her voice broke. From what you showed me. But now I don't even know who you are anymore. He closed his eyes for a moment. I'm the same man who laughed with you, who listened to your dreams, who wanted to build something with you. She shook her head. But now, all I see is someone I can't trust. The silence between them lengthened. For a moment, Daniel seemed ready to say something, but gave up. Heloisa wiped away her tears and took a step back. I need time. Without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked away without looking back. The next few days were a whirlwind. Heloisa isolated herself from the world, avoiding calls and messages. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, the memory of the disappointment burning in her chest. Camilla insisted on visiting her. You need to react, he said, taking a seat on the sofa next to her. I was humiliated in front of everyone. How do you want me to react? Camilla sighed. Do you love him? Heloisa looked away. Does it matter? It matters. Because if you still love him, you have to decide whether you want to move on or give him the chance to fix it. The words kept hammering away in her mind. 3 days later, Daniel sent a short message. Please find me. I owe it to you. She hesitated, but something inside her needed answers. In the late afternoon, she met him in a discreet cafe. As soon as she entered, Daniel stood up from where he was sitting. Thank you for coming. I don't know why I'm here, she admitted, taking a seat facing him. He took a deep breath. I know I can't fix what I've done, but I want you to understand that it was never a game. Heloisa crossed her arms. Then why did you do it? Because I didn't know how to trust anyone anymore. All the women who had approached me in the past only saw what I could offer. So you put me to the test without me knowing. He nodded, embarrassed. And the worst thing is that I really did fall in love with you. I just didn't know how to get out of the lie in time. Heloisa was silent for a long moment. I loved you, Daniel. But trust can't be rebuilt overnight. His eyes held regret. I know that, but I'm willing to try. She took a deep breath. I need time. Daniel held her gaze, a mixture of hope and fear. I'll wait, as long as it takes. Time passed, but the shadow of disappointment still hung over Heloisa. She wanted to believe that love could overcome everything, but broken trust weighed heavily on her decisions. Camilla showed up at her apartment one morning with coffee and a knowing look. What are you waiting for? Waiting for what? Heloisa repeated, confused. A divine sign, a note from fate saying, go and forgive the man you love. Heloisa snorted. It's not that simple. Of course it is. You already know the answer. You're just afraid to admit it. Heloisa closed her eyes. Camilla was right. She already knew what she wanted. She just needed the courage. That evening she picked up the phone and typed a short message to Daniel. Heloisa, can we talk? The reply came almost immediately. Daniel, always. They met in the same park where he had proposed to her. When Heloisa arrived, Daniel was already standing there. This time, no secrets. I thought you'd never speak to me again, he said, his voice full of emotion. I needed time, she replied. But I realized that despite the lie, the love I felt for you was always true. Daniel's eyes shone with hope. Does that mean, she took a deep breath, that if we want to move on, we need to rebuild everything from scratch, without lies? Daniel moved closer. I'll never hide anything from you again. Eloisa looked at him for a moment before holding out her hand. He took it, and in that touch, there was something new, a fresh start. Let's try again, she whispered. Daniel smiled. The right way this time. Together they walked towards an uncertain but genuine future.